This video is a highlight of our Zoom In storytelling for a green community event, the first of a two-part series called Zoom In, Zoom Out by the 2050 Climate Group. We hope you get something from this as much as the attendees did on the day.
Hi everyone. So it's been quite a year. In the face of a climate emergency, COVID-19 and ambitions for a green recovery, we need everyone to feel empowered and equipped to take action. But we know that this can feel very overwhelming and it can be difficult to bring people with you on the journey. Nonetheless, communities across the country are taking action, and in doing so, they are playing a vital role in responding to both the pandemic and the climate crisis. So today we're digitally joining together over Zoom to zoom in on how we can create and promote positive change at a local level within our own communities. In particular, we are going to consider how we can do this, first of all, by sharing our own stories of collaboration and change, but also by learning how to become more effective storytellers of wider climate-related problems and the actions we can take to address them. Then at our second event, Zoom Out, on Saturday, 17th April, we will be, you guessed it, zooming out and exploring the wider context of a national green recovery in Scotland. So please join us again on Saturday, the 17th of April for that. Today, we have two fantastic speakers who are going to tell us about their own experiences of storytelling for a greener community. First, we will hear from Laura, who is a trustee for the Edinburgh-based charity Earth in Common, formerly known as Leith Community Crops in Pots, and a specialist in environmental education. Laura will provide us with an inspirational example of community action in practice. This will be an excellent case study and will help us all to appreciate actions that are already being undertaken at a local level and could inspire you to seek out similar opportunities within your local community. We will then hear from Isabel, who is Chief Storyteller at UK climate charity Carbon Copy. She will help us to explore how we communicate about the climate crisis. When we start to talk about a warming planet and the ensuing destruction of lives, livelihoods, and the natural world, sometimes people find it hard to listen. In her workshop, we will discuss how understanding your audience and building a narrative which speaks to their passions can help to bring people on board. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Laura Curtis-Moss of Earth in Common. Laura is an environmental education professional with over 15 years of experience working directly with young people, adults and communities, as well as providing career-long professional learning for educators. Recent career highlights include setting fire to things on Blue Peter and travelling to the Philippines with Learning for Sustainability Scotland. In her spare time, she enjoys wild swimming and walking her two rescue greyhounds. Currently based in Edinburgh, she has been on the board of trustees for Earth in Common since 2017. We will have the opportunity for questions at the end of Laura's presentation, so please note those down as you go along. I'll hand over to you, Laura.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here this morning, though I am hoping to actually go out and be outside later. So yeah, just very briefly, I'm Laura Curtis-Moss. I'm one of the trustees on Earth in Common, which used to be called Leith Community Crops in Pots, but you'll find out why we've changed our name in the presentation. I'm also involved in Learning for Sustainability Scotland, and I'm soon going to be taking up a new job over in East Ayrshire. So if there's anybody in East Ayrshire in the chat, please give me a follow on Twitter and we can have a chat so I can get a bit of local knowledge. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get started. Yeah, so Earth in Common, we used to be called Leith Community Crops in Pots. For those of you based in Edinburgh, you'll know that we're based on Leith Links, with a sort of little allotment and growing area in the corner next to the bowling greens. But we weren't always based there. So this is a story of crops in pots and Earth in Common. So it started off, I've got a picture of Evie. I'm going to go back. If you tweet at Earth in Common, it'll be Evie answering your tweets. So just to put a friendly face to who you're going to be speaking to. She's our CEO and founder. So basically it started off, she was living in one of Edinburgh's many tenements. She had 2 children and she was caring for another couple of kids, and she wanted them to get outdoors, enjoy green space and just get the family out of the house. So she started planting crops in pots behind Dr. Bell's, which is on just off Great Junction Street in Leith. So very, very small, tiny, local, and you can see why it was called Cropped in Pots. And then a few years later, so we're talking 2013 now, before long before I joined the board, I think I'd only just moved to Edinburgh, they started doing a lot of work with schools and nurseries. So not just people and parents working with their own children, started reaching out to local schools, and it really became this lovely community effort. Around that time, there was an opportunity to kind of clean up some derelict land on Leith Links. So it was by the old football pavilion, which had been unused for, I don't even know how many years that that particular building and patch of land had been neglected. So we've got the picture of Jamie here clearing up the croft when it was just a pile of absolute rubbish and glass and just broken nonsense. So trying to clean it up and make it this lovely, lovely space for the community. And this was where we started to get the community involved, getting people investing in their local green space. And some of the people that came along that very first weekend are still involved now as growers, even just as event visitors. And Jamie is still a member of staff doing amazing work. So yeah, we haven't put her off from that happy smiley day clearing up nonsense on the croft. Started a lot of work with schools. You'll probably spot Evie and Jamie in these photos again. So that'll be Leith Primary School, and then I want to say St Mary's just off the links as well. But anyway, the local schools started working on a project called Edible Schoolyards. So growing things in school grounds and inviting classes to come and use the croft space as well. So Stanwell Nursery have a little bit of space on the croft as well. And I should say with the croft, it started off as a community growing space, but you'll soon see actually it's become so much more of a community hub from just those very, very small little patches of vegetables. So this is getting a bit more to the present day. This is more what I personally actually remember, and this is Minecraft. So yeah, we have been hampered, of course, by the pandemic and by it sort of not being, well, by not being safe for people to meet. But up until sort of COVID-19 hit the UK this time last year, and over the summer, when of course we're lockdown restrictions were relaxed and we were able to meet and participate in activities outdoors, we've been running this really successful Minecraft series of work. So doing sort of some nice wholesome outdoor education, getting kids out, enjoying the local space. And this, for me, I found this has been so inspirational, because I think usually, I mean, my education is in outdoor education. No, my background is in outdoor education, sorry. And so many of us sort of think, oh, well, that's something you have to go somewhere and do. You have to go to a forest to do forest school, or you go to the beach, or you go to a nature reserve. And actually, this is just, a 5-minute walk from me in Leith. So it's a 5-minute walk for loads and loads of sort of inner city families. So it's a brilliant opportunity, especially when we are able to offer things like this free of charge. And you might just be able to see in the background, there's a wood-fired pizza oven that was made by the community as well. Another thing that we've become involved in, and this is now we're firmly in the point where I've been involved as a trustee, and this is a campaign that I was involved in, so I can claim just a little bit of credit, although I'd like to point out Gillian and Evie and Roxana from the staff team in this photo as well. So we became part of the Good Food Nation campaign, and I think this really, if we're telling a story here, this really marks the point, I think, at which we sort of stepped up from being this community growing project into being, well, actually we are nationally engaged. I think maybe we'll talk more about this at the Zoom out on the 17th of April. We are nationally engaged, we're internationally engaged, and we're going to make our voice heard. And we're also going to take a lot of action to represent the local community. And I think quite often when we're talking about food, people living in the centre of towns their voices aren't really heard because it's assumed that they, I say they, me as well, I'm Aletha as well, you know, don't have really any engagement, you know, with the land or with crops or with livestock. And I think this was a really great opportunity to make sure that people living in Leith really got their voices heard as part of this campaign through Nourish, lobbying the government for the Good Food Nation bill, which unfortunately has been somewhat derailed by a global pandemic. But we ran a series of events, getting the community together, getting people having sort of good food conversations, and talking about what was important for food production and food sovereignty and food access in Leith. And this was something that I know other people within 2050 Climate Group have been involved in. So I sort of got involved in this as part of being in the Young Leaders Development Programme. So there's a group of us that got quite engaged with this. So if you're here, if you're here on this call, then yeah, well done. Props to you as well. Yeah, and then I think from that, you know, we started to make a bit of a name for ourselves, and that name still was Leith Community Crops in Pots. But we entered into a partnership with Thrive, as well as Living Trees of Livingstonia, and we started doing some work out in Malawi. And as a sort of trustee group, we did a lot of soul searching around this, because we had always been very, very community focused. It had all been about, sorry, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. It had all been about, you know, what was best for the local community of Leith, like very hyper local community. So people living in the EH6 area, but really a lot of it was people living within a few streets of the croft of Leith Links. And obviously we were always open to everyone in Edinburgh. We were open to chatting to people across the whole of Scotland, the whole of the UK, of course, but we had always been very, very locally focused. So we needed to do a lot of work within ourselves as a charity, talking about, well, is it appropriate for us to go and work in Malawi? How does that benefit people in Scotland? How does that benefit people in Leith, you know, our constituents, so to speak? And also sort of a lot of work around, well, you know, is this just sort of neo-colonialism? Are we actually going and getting involved in a fantastic project that will help young people? Or, you know, is this just us being, you know, for want of a better phrase, are we sort of going in there with a white savior complex? And is it patronizing? Is it colonialist? Is it, you know, is it the right thing to do? So yeah, a lot of soul searching, a lot of research, a lot of talking to people, and in the end we decided, you know, because we were working with local groups sort of on the ground in Malawi, we were working to sort of empower local people, and we were going to be sharing knowledge. And actually those of us based in Leith were equally going to be benefiting from the exchange. We decided that we were going to go ahead, and of course the bottom line is, are there some people, in this case those young children from one of the schools, are they going to have a positive experience? Is it going to benefit them? And we decided yes, it's going to benefit them and their families, and obviously any young people should always really be the priority. And this is when we got to thinking about things like restorative climate justice, and how actually even though we are a small, or we started off as a small local charity, we have a policy on restorative climate justice. And that's something that I think any of us working, even if we think we're just a small organisation based in Scotland, it's that sort of bigger, wider global perspective that we all need to be thinking about. But anyway, this was a brilliant project. We worked with local people, local organisations in Malawi to get schools growing, sustainably growing cash crops, basically. So planting stuff, growing it, harvesting it, selling it, and then that in turn is making money so that young people can get a nice cooked breakfast every morning at school. Because, you know, Malawi, a lot in common with Scotland, with the UK, everywhere around the world. There's kids turning up to school, they haven't had breakfast, and generally it's because of poverty. You know, we know here in the UK in Malawi, in America. I could just go on naming countries. You know, people are coming to school, they've not had breakfast, there's sort of systems in place in their country, people are relying on food banks. It's the same all around the world, and you're going to learn better if you've had a healthy breakfast. And this project works just like loads of projects around the UK. These young people getting a nice, warm, healthy breakfast, and they can actually focus on their learning throughout the day. It's also providing employment for other members of the families, and it's providing additional income for the schools as well, so they can build, well, they can build whatever it is they need. That's the point. The money is there for the schools. Nobody gets to tell them what they can do to it. So if they decide, well, actually we need a toilet block, brilliant, build that. If they decide, well, actually we need computers, build that. Books, build that. Whatever it is they need. And one of the first things that we were encouraging the schools to grow was chilies, because you can grow them really, really quickly. They grow really, really well in Malawi. They grow quickly. Within almost a matter of weeks, you've got some chilies that you can sell, and you can then reinvest some of that money into planting longer term things. So one of the partners we worked with was an organisation called Living Trees of Livingstonia. So Livingstonia is an area of Malawi, so guess the Scottish connection there. So one of the longer term crops that the young people and their families and schools have been growing with support from these tree experts have been sort of tree crops, so fruits and wood crops. I think it was at this point that we started to realize that actually we don't, maybe these community crops in pots, maybe we have outgrown that name, and maybe we need to start to be thinking a bit more of the bigger picture. So at the same time that all that's going on in Malawi, we've also got work going on about the kind of concept of urban crofts. So not just about it being allotments, looking more at sustainable growing to support the local community, looking a little bit at things like permaculture, community growing, and sort of that kind of concept of almost having a self-sustaining smallholding. And we think this is a replicable model that could happen elsewhere across Scotland. So perhaps even more at the moment. We know there's a lot of derelict land, a lot of I don't know if this term is used the whole way across Scotland, but certainly in Glasgow we would call them stalled spaces. And I know there's big campaigns, or again pre-COVID, that there were big campaigns to try and get these areas of land that had been earmarked for development, but for one reason or another that development hadn't gone ahead, and they're just sort of literally and metaphorically a bit of a no man's land, in that nobody's using them, nobody can use them, but actually you could plant stuff there, you could use it for the benefit of the community. And this is something that we would really like to see replicated across the whole of Scotland, if not the whole of the UK. But I think that is a post-COVID plan, because it really does rely on people being able to physically come together and actually do quite a lot of hard labour. I'm not gonna gloss over that. So yeah, that will be definitely when social distancing is a little bit more relaxed, I think. And this is us now. Well, this is us certainly over the summer. So we've sort of rebranded ourselves. That's maybe not quite right, but we're sort of seeing ourselves more as this community hub. So we've got the Croft Food Hub, doing a huge amount of growing with the community and starting to sell our vegetables. So, you know, if you want some vegetables that have 0 food miles, come down to the market when it's open. But yeah, come down to the market and buy some locally grown vegetables. We have our Hinga Butchery, which is our cafe. You get all your sort of lovely ethically sourced and local soups and teas and coffees and whatnot, and a wide variety of vegan milks, which I appreciate. We've also been running for the past 3 years. Don't quote me on any dates. I'm aware this is being recorded, but I will get dates wrong. We've also been running our Croft Carbon College. So this is a project that I have been very, very heavily involved in. I do go along to the market and I buy vegetables, but that's the extent of really my involvement in that. But the Croft Carbon College, I was involved right from the start, right in the first funding bids, and I deliver workshops, and of course I pay to go to workshops as well. And our Croft Carbon College was a Climate Challenge Fund, or is a Climate Challenge Fund funded project. Our funding is coming to an end within the next couple of months. Basically the idea is that we get people from the local community, so people who live, work, or otherwise have a connection to Leith, but anyone is welcome, to come along to a series of 7 workshops, run sort of subsequent weeks in the evenings, to learn about how they can reduce their carbon impact. So it's called 7 Easy Steps, and you will come along and in a really nice supportive group of like-minded people, find out about sort of water consumption, waste, food, clothes and fabric, all of these different things, and with the support of a huge amount of different organisations across Scotland. So Zero Waste Scotland has supported us. I believe Sustrans and various other active travel organisations have supported us as well. We have in the past been able to hire out e-bikes, which are great fun. Yeah, so getting people to come along and discuss how we are impacting the world on both a local, a national and a global level, and how we can reduce our carbon impact. So getting people to think about small changes they can make themselves, as well as what are the big changes that we need to make in society in order to enable the country as a whole to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting out into the air. Alongside that, we also offer greener skills workshop, and we do charge for them. So the 7 Easy Steps are available free of charge. They're now available up online, which is great, so you can still access them. I'll try and pop some links into the chat after maybe when we all go for a break, I'll pop some links in, so if anybody's interested, you can find out a little bit more. But we have the greener skills workshops, which again are now happening online, so they're still happening, very, very reasonably priced, I must say, to get people to learn skills that kind of link in with the circular economy, with reuse and recycle, with living a more environmentally friendly lifestyle, with being more in touch with nature, and just sort of really, I think, sort of whetting people's appetite a bit, so maybe we can get them to come back and do the full 7 Easy Steps, and also at the moment, I think, create that sort of community cohesion. So the 2 pictures we've got here, we've got somebody doing a foraging course, and it looks like a basket weaving course, a willow weaving course as well. So some of those kind of slightly rural skills, yeah, a huge variety, and just getting people to think about, can you make it yourself rather than buying it, and just, I guess, getting people to think a bit more critically about their place in the world and their impact in the world. So this is something that still goes on, and it's really shifted our focus towards the bigger picture. Through COVID, so just another little tangent, like all good stories, through COVID, everything completely changed. We had a community feeding scheme. We were able to use some vegetables from our own croft, obviously depending on the time of year. Made a lot of healthy vegetable curries, so they were all cooked. Do you remember that tiny little Hingabootry little tiny shed? They were all cooked by volunteers in that shed. We were very lucky in that we actually got a very, very well qualified chef to come and help us. And then we had volunteers cycling around Leith, EH6, EH7, delivering food for people. So I've got a nice vegetable curry there. So this is actually my partner Rebecca. I think tweeting Spokes. I noticed there's somebody from Spokes here, but yeah, so she went round, we roped her in, and she cycled around and delivered food to people. So it was brilliant getting local people out, on their bikes, getting a bit of healthy exercise when that was the only thing we were legally permitted to do, and feeding folks. And it wasn't by referral. It was basically anybody that needed a hand, whether it was because they had been furloughed, they'd lost their job, they were shielding, or just for people who were, struggling with their mental health, which I think is still an issue now, a year into the pandemic, over a year into the pandemic. People not able to get themselves a healthy, nutritious meal. So links back to what we're doing in Malawi, links back to the Good Food Nation campaign. And I'm rubbish with numbers, so don't have the numbers, but do go and have a look on our website if you are a number cruncher. And yeah, we fed hundreds of people over the few months that scheme was running. And then finally, this is my final slide, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, actually, which is 15 minutes for questions. So this is the future of Leith Community Crops in Pots. We've decided in just the last 2 months that we're going to rebrand as Earth in Common, because we are bigger than just Leith now. So we're thinking, well, actually, what links us? What links us to everybody that cares about climate change? What links us to our colleagues that we were working with in Malawi? What links us to urban and rural crofts around the UK? And we have the earth in common. So the earth in the sense of the planet that we all care about, but also the earth as in, the soil that we are growing things in. So yeah, we thought we were very clever when we came up with that one. And this is our vision for the future. So that old broken down football pavilion that many of you will have seen on Lethal Links. If you're not based in Edinburgh, have a look on our website and you can see it in all its glory. Lack of hot water, no electricity, broken roof glory. And this is what we want it to look like. So this is a plan that's been going on for the last few years. I feel like it's been going on the whole time I've been a trustee, that we want to renovate the pavilion. So the ultimate upcycle, I suppose. We've got this old pavilion that's been, nobody wants to take responsibility for it. It's just been left derelict. Nobody's using it to play football because they've got better facilities somewhere else. And actually we have a real opportunity to make this into a real community hub. So the plan is that we're going to be able to have a proper cafe. I'm laughing now saying, oh, we're going to have a cafe where people can sit down inside. Well, maybe one day. We're going to have a proper cafe where we are selling our produce. We're going to have a proper little shop where we can sell vegetables we've grown, as well as ethically sourced food from elsewhere. It's going to be affordable. It's going to be healthy. We are going to have toilets, which I think everybody that uses the links is going to be pretty pleased about. We're going to have office space for us. And we're also going to have space for communities and space for learning. So we're going to have space for those schools that come out and work with us. Obviously, the idea is we want them to be outside as much as possible, but this means that even if it's -10, even if it's icy or windy to such an extent that maybe it's dangerous to be out on the croft, they can come inside and they can still do some planting, planting out things to go in greenhouses or whatever. They can still have valuable learning experiences. We're going to have rooms that the community can use. So we had somebody that had their wedding on the croft. So yeah, they can do that a bit more fancy. And any community group will be able to use it for not quite a nominal fee, but we're not going to be making a profit off local community groups and things like that. So we're hoping it's just going to be this lovely community space. Don't know if we're actually going to be able to have chickens on the croft. I don't know how the neighbours are going to feel about that, but yeah, trees and cafes and this wonderful new space and this wonderful new name. We just found out, no concept of time because I've been working from home. We just found out probably within the last month that we actually did secure some funding through one of the government schemes. So this is actually going to happen. So this, after three years of very hard work, we are going to have this new space that is just bursting with potential for the community to engage people with climate change, to engage people with food, just to provide a safe space. Yeah, so I think I will end there, and I'll stop screen sharing, and I think Alex is going to wrangle some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. That was an absolutely fascinating presentation. Lots to share about what you've done in the past, and lots to share about what's coming excitingly in the future as well. So that's really brilliant to hear. You'll be pleased to know that we have a whole lot of questions winging their way into our Menti. So I'm just going to share my screen there. So again, the first question that we've got here is it the same type of person, Laura, that volunteers with you, or do you have a diverse group of people?
I think that's a good question. I think probably when we first started, it was a certain type. I hope you can hear the inverted commas in my voice. I do think quite often, and I've found this everywhere that I've worked or volunteered, is that you do tend to have certain groups of people that are motivated to volunteer. You quite often have people who are retired, who have a disposable income, no longer need to work, and have the time to donate. Or it may be younger people, possibly students or recent graduates, that are volunteering to get experience. And yes, we do have a great deal of both of those sort of types of people. But one of the things that I have noticed with the craft is that we tend to get a lot more male volunteers involved in the gardening side of things, which I know is slightly different to the statistical demographics that a lot of places get. So I think it is quite diverse, but yeah, I would like to see it becoming more diverse, because I think I do feel like there are certain groups of people in the UK, particularly people that maybe identify as working class, or Black people, people of colour, who often feel that they are excluded from volunteering opportunities. So I would like to really take active steps to make sure that we were able to welcome people that I guess traditionally maybe don't feel welcomed in this white middle class space.
Really interesting, thank you. So in terms of engaging volunteers, we've got a question around what have you found to be the most effective way to get people to engage in and care about their local area? Do you have any advice there?
I think the best thing is just to be there. So one of the things that's really helped is having the Hingabuchi, so having our little cafe. You know, if you're just there on site every day, everybody walking their kids to school, taking their kids to the park, walking the dog, things like that, people just start to see you as being there and see you as being reliable, and you just build up this relationship really slowly. So I think just being there and having events like the market really help as well, because I think one of the things that you've got to be really mindful of is that people are not going to come and engage with you and get involved on the first time that they meet you or your organization. You need to have, I think there was some research done when I worked for the RSPB that said something like you need to have about sort of 7 interactions before people want to come and sort of join your group. So I think just being consistent and giving everything a try, like giving things a try, you know, especially now when everything's digital, just give it a go. Try Facebook, try Twitter, try hosting an event, try a Zoom quiz, because different things are going to appeal to different people.
Yeah, definitely. I love the Hingabuchi. The name of that is just fantastic. It's really great and makes it sound like a really friendly and lovely place. We've had a direct question from Geraldine, actually, based on just your last answer. Do you have any idea what the barriers are to diversity? Do you have any thoughts on that, just around what you were mentioning about gender split and reaching a wider audience? That's a very tricky question.
Yeah, that is a tricky question, because I think it goes down to the very system and the very history of the United Kingdom. You know, people don't feel welcome because historically they weren't welcome. And even just even just little things like, I did a lot of work in museums, and even just little things like if in your advertising you're only showing white middle class families, if you're, an Asian mum, you're going to be like, well, that's not for me and my kids, is it? So you can't, you can't be what you can't see. So if your mum didn't volunteer, if your dad didn't volunteer, if actually your grandparents were turned away when they tried to get involved with a local community group, then you're not going to do it. So I think it's having that active representation. And yeah, there's a huge amount of work to be done, in the UK, unpicking, the history of the country for the last 400 odd years.
Yeah, and unpicking what sits behind that. And it sounds like maybe perhaps speaking at events like this as well, with a really sort of diverse group of people from all over the country, will hopefully kind of improve that as well. Moving on a little bit to the COVID-19 support service that you've mentioned, there's a couple of questions in here, one around whether what kind of demand you saw for that support service and whether that's increased or decreased since you sort of established it. So that's a kind of one of the questions that's popped up. And then there are a couple around kind of advice on how to get involved, but we can come on to that in a second.
Yeah, so I'm just going to address, I just saw somebody popped up in the chat that they spoke to their local mosque who are really keen to get involved. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you can sort of target like a group of people that are already a group of people that are sort of working together or have something in common, then yeah, because I think if you're one you're one individual, and I've certainly found this myself, as although I can't speak to racism, of course, but as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I would be uncomfortable going somewhere as like the only person. But if there was like a group of me and my peers, my friends, yeah, I would totally give something a go. So I think that's a good way. And I know where I am in Leith, I live practically next door to it. There's the Sikh temple as well, who obviously, are very, very heavily involved in providing food for the community in during COVID and before that as well. And yeah, if you get in touch with them, they are a like-minded community group, they're sort of up for getting involved. So I think that's a good tip as well. Find a group of people that are already doing stuff and invite them in as a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so COVID, has that increased or decreased? So we no longer have funding to deliver the COVID community food scheme. So that's all in Leith. That is very, very much just to give a shout out to Full Hearts Empty Kitchens. Important to get that the right way around. So they're based out of Leith Theatre. I think they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and sort of everyone in Leith has kind of directed all of the support to them. So yeah, definitely it's increased. Week on week, we were seeing more and more people. I think not necessarily more and more people needing food, but more and more people sort of overcoming that, almost like that shame threshold, and feeling like they could ask for food. And on the one hand, I hate to think that that's because people are becoming more desperate. I hope that was because we were working to take away some of the stigma and make people realize that ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. But yeah, I mean, looking at the numbers of people in Leith who are needing to have food delivered every day because of COVID, because of the societal changes, because of COVID, it's heartening to see the amazing work that people are doing, but it's so upsetting to live in a country where that's necessary.
And there's a really interesting question in here as well around, are there any positive changes that have been brought about by the pandemic? Obviously, it's been a really terrible time for many people. But is there anything that you see as being involved within your organisation that's actually been a positive that's come out of the changes?
I think for us and for other organisations I've been involved in, it has been that solidarity. So yeah, I've really seen solidarity amongst the people of Leith, and I'm sure other people have noticed it in their own local communities as well. But you know, people have really stood up to support each other, and people have you know, people have really gone out of their way to help others. You know, all the people who are, you know, who are going out and doing door-to-door deliveries, and it's a small risk, but actually you suddenly see people taking these risks and these sacrifices to help other people. You know, and of course we see it every day with sort of nurses and doctors in the NHS, but just so many just regular people, you know, offering lifts to people, taking food round to people, all these little sort of neighbourly acts of kindness that I think sometimes the media would have us believe doesn't exist in the modern world.
And that sense of community spirit is definitely something that many of us have seen, I'm sure, in our own communities as well. There's a couple of questions here around people who are tempted to start up a community garden of their own. So I'm leading a sustainability group at my institute, and there is the idea of a community garden at the side after COVID. However, people are afraid it is too much of a commitment. What would you recommend, and how much work will it be to get started? And we've got a similar question around what would be your main bits of advice for someone looking to start a new community-based group like yours? Could you give us some tips on that, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to say it is incredibly hard and it is a big commitment. I think especially for that core group, you know, you do need people who are willing to make you know, sacrifice a lot of time and make a big commitment. But equally there are, you know, there are other people who can make many smaller commitments. So it takes a village kind of thing. But yeah, it's hard work, and you know, physically and emotionally, and it takes a long time. Like, it's taken Earth in Common years. You know, it's taken us years to start to get to the point where actually we were established enough that we were able to get funding. But it's worth it. You know, I think that is the thing. The hard work, when it pays off, it is the best feeling in the world. You know, all those kind of 6 o'clock in the morning starts to put the market up, you know, just with 3 of you, because you couldn't afford to pay anybody to come in and do it. You know, all that hard work does pay off, and when you actually see people coming and enjoying it, it's all worth it. Yeah, so I just think, you know, you need a core group of people who are really committed, and be aware that it's going to be a work of years rather than months. And progress is sort of slow but steady. And I think it's like growing anything. I think with a community group, you know, you're planting a tree, you're not planting chilies. And think of it like that. You know, you are, and like when you're planting trees, you are making an investment for the future.
I really love that analogy. It's a great one. We've got a question in the chat, actually. Is it possible to join this noble initiative online and become a network supporter, as I am living in Tunisia? What's your reach like beyond Scotland, Laura? Is that something that someone can get involved in? Do you have any sort of volunteering roles or anything that would extend beyond the boundaries of Scotland?
Not at the moment, not volunteering roles, but you definitely can get involved. We are a membership organisation, so people are able to join as a member and support us with a financial donation. I think at the moment it's about £5 a year, so really very cost effective. We do also have a whole range of online workshops, so if you are living overseas or actually just outside the Edinburgh Local Council area at the moment, come along to one of our online workshops. A lot of them are free or by donation, so obviously for anyone who's not working, or you know, just money is tight, then you're very welcome to join free of charge. And I would say, as a starting point, come along, come to a couple of the workshops, chat to some of our tutors, find out a little bit more, and yeah, I think maintain radio contact. Follow us on Twitter. Have a chat. We're always keen to talk to people from around the world who have, you know, like-minded and interested.
Perfect. And we can perhaps share some of the details of your online workshops and some of the follow-up material as well. I know we've got some resources going out afterwards, so we can certainly share that with people.
Brilliant.
Really good question, and a really tricky one that we battle with a lot at 2050 as well. How have you continued to build momentum and enthusiasm with volunteers and combat feelings of climate delay and anxiety? I think that's something that many of us engaged in this space suffer from. So is that something that you kind of consider with your volunteers?
Yeah, well, with sort of all of the people that we engage with, yeah, I think it's difficult, because I think if you are taking climate change seriously, to some extent, we probably should be anxious. But I think one of the big things that we do is, because we have projects going on, and we're doing work with the community, is kind of focus on the positive changes that we are making and that we can make. You know, whether it is in terms of sort of lobbying government to try and make national change, or whether it is helping people feel empowered by making their own change. And I think that the main thing is to have that sense of group cohesion, because it's almost like, well, I feel anxious, but actually when I go to a board meeting, I know I'm with 7 other people that share the same fears and hopes with me. So yeah, I guess I still sort of feel anxious, but I'm not alone with it.
Yeah,
and I think that's really important. And I think that's some things of all of us that are involved with 2050, you know, maybe can do, at least share that anxiety together.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a question about a slightly different audience around schools. You'd mentioned in your presentation that you like to engage with schools, and someone is asking around the desire of schools to engage, and I guess how you've reached schools in that space. Is that something you could tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, I think primary schools, it's pretty, when I say easy, I mean comparatively easy. But yeah, primary schools, they are certainly keen to engage. I think the main barrier to primary schools is if there's a cost involved. So particularly around, and again, I've found this in other places I've been involved in, particularly if there's a cost around travel. So if you have a project where schools can come to you on foot, or you can go to them, of course, again, when it's safe to do so, then yeah, they will find the time to host you. Secondary schools, it's always a lot more difficult, because there are so many other pressures on the pupils' time, but on the school's time. And I think it's just, again, it's about taking the time to make that connection. So I think, you know, really, really important, if you're working with schools, to make sure you're going in and you're meeting with the teachers and the other adults that you need to get on board with first. You know, so making sure you're having those phone calls with the head teacher, you're having a Zoom meeting with the teacher, you know, you're going in and you're having a meeting with the staff team, you're having a meeting with the janitor, you know, all of these things, and making sure you've got buy-in from the adults first. You've built those relationships before you even meet the young people, because the young people will be up for it. Basically, you know, 9 times out of 10, the kids, they want to get outside, they want to get their hands dirty, they want to, you know, they want to grow something, they want to eat something. And you know, those young people that don't, there's always something, an aspect of it that they'll be interested in, even if maybe they don't want to put their hands in the soil, whatever it is. You know, personally, I'm always a little bit squeamish about putting my hands in mud, but that might just be because I have 2 dogs, so I know what can be in mud sometimes.
It's not for everyone, that's for sure. I think that relationship building and getting all the stakeholders on board is so important. I'm just going to finish up with sort of one question, and then one just a very sort of brief point. There's a question in here around how Earth in Common has tried to engage with those who aren't already thinking about taking climate and environmental action. So sometimes here at 2050 Climate Group, we struggle to direct or to attract people who maybe aren't already engaged in the agenda. So is there anything that you can say to us about that? And then finally, there's a really interesting, possibly putting you on the spot here, but there's an interesting one around how do you sum up briefly the amazing work of Earth in Common when you meet new people locally, because there's so much to talk about. So do you have an elevator pitch? So can you finish with an elevator pitch for us?
Yeah. That is a difficult one.
It is a difficult one. I'm putting you on the spot, so you can feel free to skip past that. But it would be really interesting to know about how you engage with sort of people who are maybe not quite as engaged in the climate and environmental agenda, for sure.
Yeah, so well, first of all, how have we tried to engage with people on already thinking about environmental action? I guess sort of three main ways that we would do that. I mean, firstly is through working with schools and other kind of different community groups. So, you know, getting people in meeting other objectives for people. So for, you know, for schools, it's right, you've got curriculum objectives to meet. So we're going, you know, we're going to work with you and do some work around that. The other thing I would say would be through our sort of greener skills workshops. So quite often people maybe aren't thinking about climate action, but you know, they want to learn how to repair a bike or make something, or at the moment they're just bored and they want to come along to a fun workshop. So it's by offering sort of different things to kind of tempt people in, I suppose. And then, yeah, thirdly, it's, you know, we are so privileged in that we have a physical space. So in some ways, it's very easy for us to engage with the local community, especially now when the only things you can do are going outside. So we have a whole almost captive audience on Leaf Links. And do a lot of them want coffee and tea and ice creams in the summer? Yes, they do. So they come to us and they get their coffee, and then they come back every day to get their cup of coffee, and they end up, you know, getting chatting and learning a little bit more. And I think the hope by offering this physical presence with facilities that people use, it's just, yeah, really meeting people where they are, finding out what they value. You know, do people value sort of healthy, inexpensive food for their families? Yeah, generally you do. You want your dinner, you don't want it to cost loads, and you don't want it to make you sick. So meeting people. It is fair trade coffee. It's from a local supplier. He's Edinburgh based. It's all fair trade and ethical, don't worry. Sorry, just something popping up in the chat there. Felt like I had to say that. And yeah, how do we sum it up in an elevator pitch? Well, I trap people for 45 minutes in a Zoom meeting, of course. No, I think the key things I would say is that it's, you know, it's a resource for the community. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking upstairs because they're excited about my partner taking them out for a walk. Yeah, it's about the community. It's about what we can give back to the community, and it's about outdoor opportunities for young people, and it's about healthy, sustainable, affordable food for people living in Leith.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. It wouldn't be a Zoom call without a little bit of a pet noise in the background. Not a problem at all. I've been telling many people to stop apologizing for that because it's just the world these days. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm going to head off and probably walk those dogs now. But yeah, if people have more questions or people want to grab them from the chat, Alex, if you want to send them through, I'm happy to answer them. Or people, if I didn't answer your questions, send me a tweet. And I'd love to have, a bit more of a chat, and yeah, have a fantastic rest of the session.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. We'll definitely keep the conversation going. Thank you.
I am currently working for a charity called Carbon Copy, and I thought I'd just start by giving a quick overview of what we're about. We're a UK charity, and we launched back in May last year, right in the middle of the first lockdown. So it was an interesting time to start an organisation, but we are basically about inspiring big thinking, local action on the climate crisis. And we do this by sharing and celebrating the stories that we find across the country of people who are already taking action on the climate crisis and reducing carbon emissions in their local areas, whether they're community groups or councils or companies that are doing those kinds of things already. We share their stories and hope that other people will be inspired to replicate what they're doing in their part of the country. And our goal overall is to speed up progress to carbon zero. So on to storytelling. Oh, and my screen is now not going to work. Okay, I have to click it at the bottom. Sorry, guys, technical issue. Right, so on to storytelling. So the first thing that I would suggest anyone should do before starting to write a story or put a story together is to think about these 6 questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Basically, if you can answer all these questions, then you're in a really good place to start telling a story. So the who are your target audience, and target audience is really, really important because you might feel like there's a story that you want to tell, but it might not be that the way that you want to tell it is going to resonate with everybody. So if you think about who your target audience are and what they are all about, and then how your story is going to work for them. But also, as well as thinking about the main audience that you're thinking that you want to tell the story to, you should also think about the people that those people are influenced by. So it might be that journalists or influencers on social media or local leaders are people that those people respond to. So you should try to think about making your story resonate with those people, the people who are going to influence the people that you're actually trying to influence yourself, as well as the audience that you're trying to target. What is your story? So what is the main thing that you want your audience to take away? What is the key message of your story? Where do your target audience get their information? This is really important. So once you know who your target audience are, you should be thinking about where they spend most of their time and where they absorb their information from. So some people get lots of their information from television, some people read lots of online news, some people get everything from social media. So think about who your target audience are and where they spend most of their time, where you're going to reach them, basically. Think about when you want to tell the story. So if you've got a news story, so something that's brand new, you want to tell it as soon as possible, because then you're going to get there before other people do. But maybe it's something that's a little bit more time specific. Maybe it's related to a national campaign. Maybe it's related to something that you or your organization is working on and you're doing some kind of big launch. So think about a time that is going to work for what you're trying to tell people. I guess the most important one is probably the why. So I think sometimes people tend to start out trying to tell a story and haven't really thought about what they're trying to get people to do, what they're trying to get out of it. So you need to know what your goal is, basically. Are you trying to raise awareness of an issue? Are you trying to build engagement or support for a particular campaign? Are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to get people to volunteer for something? So why are you telling the story? What is your goal? And then finally, the how is having decided who your target audience are and also knowing where those people spend most of their time and absorb most of their information. What medium are you going to choose to communicate your story to them? So, you might not have the resources to do lots and lots of different versions. So you pick the one that you think is going to make the most impact. So maybe you think a graphic novel will have the most impact. Maybe you think a documentary film will. Maybe it will just be a newspaper article. So you think about, who you're trying to speak to, what the story is you're trying to tell, and choose the way that you want to do it. So storytelling is all about narrative, and it's very important to have a narrative around whatever it is you're trying to communicate. So you might have decided what your story is going to be about. Perhaps you're thinking of writing a story or developing a story about flooding in a local village somewhere, and your overall goal is to communicate the climate change is responsible for this flooding. But maybe the issue of climate change is not going to resonate with everybody, and maybe not with the audience you're going for. So you need to decide on an angle that is going to resonate for your audience. So maybe your audience are very business focused and you're going to focus on the financial impact of the flooding. Maybe your audience are much more kind of community focused and you're going to focus on the people whose lives are affected by the flooding, their homes have been destroyed. But whatever your angle is, it needs to make sense for the audience you're speaking to. And in the same way, you need to establish who your characters are. So say you went for the business sort of focus, you might end up speaking to somebody from the local council, you might end up speaking to a business leader whose business has been destroyed by the flooding, or you might if you're going for the community type angle, you might be speaking to kind of residents of the community or people who have given up public spaces to allow people to reside there whilst their houses are being sorted out, basically. So you just think about who your characters are and who is going to kind of guide your story and make people feel something. It's also probably worth noting at this point that you should pick characters who you actually have access to. So it would be lovely to be able to interview, you know, the Prime Minister. Well, maybe it would be lovely to interview the Prime Minister. It depends what on your leanings, but, you know, don't try and do something that you actually can't do. Be realistic with who you're going to include in your story. Because, you know, it needs to be manageable, but sometimes people who don't seem like particularly high-flying people will be the best characters and will have the most interesting stories to tell. We talk about a kind of a narrative arc, and the top of the arc is usually what we call a challenge moment. So when you're thinking about telling a story, it should have a moment of struggle, or where something very exciting happens, or there's a twist. If it was a fictional story, you know, you can create this yourself, but in a kind of non-fiction story, which is mainly what we're talking about, it might be that when you interview one of the stakeholders, talking about the flooding example again, something particularly difficult happened. So maybe somebody went to rescue somebody's cat in a rowing boat, but then the rowing boat had a hole in it and they nearly drowned. That could be your challenge moment, and it would just kind of guides the story forward and makes it more exciting and kind of makes people think, oh my goodness, this is a really serious issue. I really need to kind of engage with this. And then finally, it's really important to have a conclusion that drives action, that makes people want to do something. So having engaged with your story, whether it's via video or via reading, or however you've communicated, the people should come to the end of it and think, gosh, I need to do something, or I'm going to sign this petition, or I'm going to donate money now. So your conclusion should really push that forward. So these sort of 5 points are things that I think can really make stories very powerful. And I think particularly with stories about climate change, it can be really difficult to take what is a very big and sometimes quite alien concept to people and make it feel like something they can engage with. So I think that this first point about answering big questions is really about that. It's about taking a huge issue that is complex and making it seem manageable and making your audience feel something about it. Basically, since the dawn of time, people have been telling stories to try and make sense of big concepts. And, you know, science has come along and explained lots of the things that we previously had to tell stories about. But actually, sometimes you still need the stories. You still need the stories to help people understand what it is all about and to make it relevant to their life. So this question of relevance is the second point, really. Just talking about facts and figures and talking about people on the other side of the world, or, you know, things that people are unable to engage with because it doesn't make sense in their life, is going to turn people off. So you need to find the thing that is going to excite the people that you're talking to and make it relevant to them. It's really important to include empathy and emotion, and really it's the thing that changes a story from being just information delivered to a story. And you want to sort of tug at people's heartstrings and make them feel something, because once people start feeling things, they start wanting to do things. Just to say at this point as well that just emotion doesn't have to be just sadness. And I think a lot of times people are trying to tell a story, they're always trying to make people cry and make people feel sad. But actually, you can make people feel elated with a story. You can make people feel excited. You can make them feel angry as well. And all of those things are great. Like whatever emotion your story creates is good. You know, it will still motivate people to do something. Your story should also include some element of surprise or intrigue, and it might be as simple as you're delivering new information that people didn't know before, and therefore that is surprising or even shocking, depending on what the story is about. But it could be that it's information that people are familiar with, but it's being told from a different angle. You're putting it in a new context or using a new voice to deliver that information. So maybe you're speaking to somebody who has an experience of the subject that is very different from how people have understood it previously. So that element of intrigue will really help. And then finally, it should always spark future ideas. So this is, again, coming back to that conclusion that drives people forward and makes people want to do something. A story should always end with a kind of something that leaves something open, that people think, oh, I need to know more about that. I need to do something about that. I need to investigate that more. It should spark future ideas. So this is the kind of final thing, but it's also the beginning of a thing. So when you're writing a story, it's very rare that it's just a start and finish thing, and then that's it, and there's nothing else happening afterwards. You know, communication is about conversation. So your story should spark something in people, and then whatever it sparks might end up relating back to a next project or a next campaign or a next story that you want to work on. So you should always be thinking about the so what happens next? How will you measure the impact your story has had? What will you do next? How will you go back to the people that you've spoken to in that story and find out what happens in a year's time or 5 years time? How can you keep the conversation going, and how will you understand what the impact your story has had? So you should have that in the back of your mind when you're developing the story, and be thinking about it as a way to continue raising awareness and keeping the topic in people's minds. Okay, how can you make your story relevant to the right people? So this is thinking about your audience groups. And as mentioned, we're going to be doing a task where you're going to be thinking about a climate crisis related story for 3 different audience groups. So these 7 groups that are displayed on the screen have come about via a piece of research by an organization called Climate Outreach. If you haven't come across them, they're brilliant. They're very, very interesting. All of their research is really useful. This particular piece was called Britain Talks Climate, and they basically spoke to a huge cross-section of British people about the climate crisis and about what they could do about it and how they felt about it. They divided the population into these 7 segments, which kind of broadly represent the people in the UK. And obviously there probably will be outliers, but I think they're quite sort of good segments. They don't sort of follow normal political party lines, and they don't follow normal kind of socio-economic group lines. They're a little bit more nuanced than that. And I think it's a really helpful way to think about different audiences. So in our task, we're going to be looking at progressive activists, disengaged traditionalists, and established liberals. So I'm going to read their sort of definitions of what those 3 groups are about. I would urge you to go look at the Climate Outreach research and have a look at all the other groups as well, because I think that they're all really interesting. But just these 3 groups are the ones we're going to focus on today. You will be able to go to the website during the task, but obviously there's going to be limited time, so it's probably worth trying to absorb as much now as possible. I'll try to be clear when I read out the stuff. So progressive activists, who make up around 13% of the British public, are opinionated, confident, outward-looking, and restless for change. This segment is probably the most familiar to climate campaigners. Progressive activists are very engaged across a wide range of issues, with climate change central among them. From voting to protesting and signing petitions, members of this segment are boldly progressive in their politics, with the most left-wing views on social and economic issues, and they're consistently active in their own lives on climate change. But they are also exhausted by the division in politics, and they're most likely to feel that the country is divided. They're most likely to feel that the system is rigged to serve the rich and influential, and they're united in their belief that inequality is a major problem, so sexism, racism, economic injustice. They tend to be the youngest of all the segments, and they also have the highest proportion of people who are university educated and a large number of high earners. They overwhelmingly support the Labour Party, and they've voted to remain in the EU. So that's your first segment. So think about them, hold that thought. Your second segment are disengaged traditionalists, who make up 18% of the British public, according to the research. They are alienated, disillusioned, and skeptical about progress, about society in general, and to a certain extent about climate change. They feel excluded and frustrated and unrepresented politically, and they feel that other people will have are prioritized over them. They're most likely to be male, and they are largely millennials and baby boomers. I assume that most people know what they are, sort of people who are born up to the millennium, and baby boomers is sort of people who are born in the 50s and 60s. They tend to describe themselves as working class and to be of lower social economic status and to have low to medium levels of education. They skew right on social and economic issues, right wing, and they express authoritarian tendencies. So they are okay with the fact with leaders who are willing to break the rules. That's one of the questions they had to answer. Despite their perceived disconnection from mainstream society, they are most likely to say that things in this country are going in the right direction. So they have a sense of optimism, but sort of weird optimism, unusual optimism. And they have a survival instinct. And then the final segment that we're going to look at is established liberals, who make up around 12% of the British public. So they are a mostly Conservative Party voting segment with right-leaning views about the economy. Established liberals nonetheless skew towards the left on social/cultural issues, expressing a pride in the diversity of the country, and are characterized by their comfortable, trusting, and untroubled perspective linked to their financial security. Of all the segments, they feel the least threatened or vulnerable, are firmly meritocratic, which means they believe that people get what they deserve in life, and are amongst the least likely to agree that the country is getting worse. So I know that's a lot to take in. Those are your three segments. Please, in the task, actually go to the website and you can look at that information again. And there's also a great section for each one about how to communicate with those particular segments. So you'll have a chance to have a look at that as well. So that is leading quite nicely onto the task itself. So I'll just read through this, and then you'll have an opportunity to look at this slide again in your breakout rooms when we get to them. But this is basically what we'd like you to do. You're working on a campaign for an environmental charity about the declining numbers of pollinators, which are insects like bees, butterflies, moths, and also birds, small mammals in Britain. You're trying to engage a broad spectrum of the public in this issue, and your goal is to get as many signatures on a petition asking for government action on this issue as possible. We'd like you to come up with 3 storytelling approaches to raise awareness of this issue and the petition with 3 different audience groups who we've just gone over. So you can read more about each of the groups by clicking the links on the slide. Yeah, particularly focus on the communicating with these groups section, I would advise. So for each approach, we'd like a title or a headline, what medium you plan to use. So as sort of discussed, you know, anything is possible, basically. Whatever way you think would be the best way to communicate with this particular audience group. We'd like to be as creative as possible, really. Some bullet points on what your key messages will be, and anything that you think would help you to tell the story. So this is where you can sort of say, an interview with a politician, a graph that shows this, some photographs of this, any other kind of information. And, in this case, we're not going to be restricting your ideas here. If it's a little bit if it sounds like something that might be a bit difficult to get in real life, it doesn't really matter. Best case scenario, you'd be able to have everything that you needed to tell this story. So just, again, be quite creative here. So that's the task. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. We'll spend about 40 minutes on it now, I think, and then we'll come back and hear some ideas from all of the different groups.
Great, perfect. I hope you all enjoyed your discussions, and we've got Isabel still here with us. So we are going to ask each of the breakout rooms to give us a little bit of feedback if you're comfortable doing so. If you're not, then that's absolutely fine. Emma, would you like to come in?
Was there a group in particular you wanted to start with? We go with the first
just
one.
entirely your choice. So if you just like to give us feedback on one of the groups, entirely optional up to you.
If there's one that you felt like you did the best, like did the most kind of development on, like whichever one you're most comfortable with, really.
Okay, well, we started with the first one, the progressive activists. So maybe with that, and anyone from the group just jump in, because my writing has got quite messy and is all over the place, so I might miss stuff. But basically we thought the angles for this group could be the link to climate change, as the group were familiar to climate, and have that as one of their key issues. So we thought trying to make a link there between pollinators and climate change, and also trying to make the link to inequalities, and sort of social inequalities as well, if that was possible. So that was sort of our key angle. We also thought, because the group were uni educated, we could have links to sort of science, so have a link to a more detailed message so people could learn more about the issue. And also on that, we thought we could link to other ways that they could be active, so other actions that they could take, as well as signing the petition. What else have we said? In terms of the medium, we thought maybe podcasts, social media, YouTube, that sort of thing. And we thought it would be good if the message came from organisations that they might already be part of, so things like Greenpeace or 2050, that sort of thing, that the people are sort of part of and working with already. I think that's all we really said on that. The name, we were thinking something like Be Active for Climate or Be the Change. We also
I like Be the Change, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We had some fun with that. It's something about making a buzz with the social media campaign, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyone jump in from the team if I've missed anything. I think that was our key points from that group.
I think for messengers, we also said about maybe Greta Thunberg or something, like using people that might already be followed by this group as messengers of the bigger message.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing, thanks Rebecca. Isabel, did you want to comment on anything from that before we move on to the next group?
No, that sounds really good. It sounds like you've thought about it quite thoroughly. I think definitely the kind of keeping it on the sort of channels that are frequented by younger people, particularly. Like, I really like the idea of a podcast. I think it could be really nice. And obviously you've talked about including represent people who they respect, like people like Greta Thunberg, but you know, even if it was somebody from one of those organizations you mentioned that has like a kind of a strong voice on the issue, like a podcast where they were included in speaking about the issue might be good. And you know, to give it that kind of gravitas, you know, that they're kind of talking about the issue and making it sound important. And you know, I think that group really responds to the kind of educated speaker and facts and science and things, as well as the emotional side of things. So you have to always include the emotional side of things. But yeah, no, that sounds really good. Really good.
Perfect, thanks Isabel. So from one of the other groups, we've got a combination of Andrew, Marissa and Natalie. So I'm not sure if someone from your group maybe wants to jump off mute. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, and I know Natalie as well, so I can definitely put her on the spot if needs be. Is there anybody from that group that might want to give us a few headlines of your discussion?
I'm happy to. I hadn't really taken many notes during it, but we decided to talk about the disengaged traditionalists, and we thought we would do a newspaper campaign, because that seemed to be where they get most of their news from in general, and bring in scientists as well to talk and put their points of view in the articles. How we thought we would target it is relating it to their everyday lives, because they are probably a bit disengaged with what this issue would actually mean for them. So we called our campaign No Barley, No Beer. So how it would really affect all the food chains and then their everyday lives and the comforts that they have as well. So we were trying to really connect their own personal issues with the overall issues of the campaign, and that's how we were really going to target this group of people. If anyone else from my group wants to jump in, if I've missed anything, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Natalie. No barley, no beer. That sounds pretty serious. I think that's something that a lot of people could get on board with.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great, like, I can see that being a really good hashtag as well. Like, I don't know how many of these people are on Twitter, but they, you know, like that's a great sort of catchphrase. And I think it would probably work across a few of the different social groups as well. Like you say, I don't think it's specific to disengaged traditionalists, but it's definitely like a hard-hitting message. I think for anyone who's not particularly interested in insects or bees, like no beer is probably like a pretty bad situation to be in. So yeah, definitely it feels like you've really gone for the right sort of approach there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Natalie. Apologies for putting you on the spot. So we've got two other groups. Would anyone just like to jump off mute from either of the two other groups and maybe give us a little bit of an insight? If you feel
Hi, I'm going to just come straight in. Sorry. So the group here, interesting, me and Natalie were in the same room, but there was only two of us, and then we just got dumped back out of it into different rooms. So that was quite fun. So we also did the disengaged traditionalists in our group. So it's kind of interesting, Brexit voted, sort of Trump supporter type person. We were trying to think through that. And we tried to get to the point where it was, we kind of came to we thought finance and like cost of products would be quite important. And also there was a lot of chat, not about beer, but about cider. Supposed to be a cider drinking group. So we came up with produce costs to rocket as free pollinators decline. And I know that's still, there was a bit of argument about using even the word pollinators was thought to be maybe a bit too technical. But the messages were around kind of the price of British products and the fact that we'd maybe have to import more, obviously thinking about the Brexit type thing. We'll have to, food labelling, where food comes from, you can support your national food growers if you do this, and then thinking about the focus being like, what would be their disadvantage if this isn't the case? So it's kind of like almost like trying to turn the negative into a positive. And then in terms of quotes and things, like we were saying that instead of having a scientist quote, then Kirsty was saying you should really have the word boffins in there. It's like the boffins have announced, and then some sort of science kind of quotation in there as well. So we're thinking about maybe doing a graph as well, like of the other stakeholders, and to get a local British farmer talking about the impacts. So British farmers, and then a cider maker, back into our cider thing, talking about the importance of that and what it means to their business in terms of, costs, crop resilience, all those kind of things, but it'd be around the kind of pricing and supporting our jobs, that sort of idea. Another thing with like looking at how you represent the data, we talked about maybe a graph. And like I was going on about the fly squat that you used to see on cars. If you ever washed a car like 25, 30 years ago, you think about how much fly squat there was on it and how much there is now. And it's as scary as anything to think, where have they all gone? So maybe we could draw a graph of that. But then there was a bit of discussion about, well, people could think that's quite good, that you don't have that to clean up anymore. So it's just trying to work out what's the best angle to kind of get that in on. So by way of which communities to get it out into, Facebook was mentioned. There's a few people on the Glasgow, from Glasgow, everyone's from different places, but Glasgow Live was mentioned, which is a Facebook feed with kind of, cultural and historic and sort of a bit gossipy and things as well, but that could be a good thread that sort of segment would actually be interested in. So yeah, community, family, kind of Facebook type things really in terms of media. I'd suggested sport. I'm not quite sure how to angle that in with the sort of sport angle onto it as well to try and get sort of more coverage. Maybe we could get some sort of sports fields talking about, I don't know, how easy it is for them to even grow the grass for the pitches. I don't know. So, produce cost to rocket as free pollinators decline.
You've thought through that so much, Geraldine. There's been so much discussion in your group. Thank you so much. Can we invite anybody from the final group to perhaps give us a little bit of feedback just before we wrap things up?
That was absolutely amazing. Okay, so we looked at both the progressive activists and the disengaged traditionalists. I think most of the disengaged traditionalists has been covered already in way more detail than we had time to go into it. The only thing that we did think was that we also wanted a newspaper campaign in one of the tabloids. We wanted posters that people could actually stick up in the windows, because we felt that the important thing was that you brought in the tribe. So it's actually speaking to their own group and spreading that word. So similar to the NHS, where you had the posters in your window to support the NHS, you would get your poster in your newspaper so that you could stick that in your window, say supporting the birds and the bees, that kind of. And also we felt that it would be really important to bring in, we were talking about footballers, but like Marcus Rashford stepped up about the End Child Poverty, bringing in somebody who'd had experience, you know, that had something that they could relate to in their own lives, but would be sort of well respected by that group of people. For the progressive activists, we went very quickly. We felt that all of us identified, or most of us identified as progressive activists anyway, so that made it quite a lot easier, I think, to actually identify what we would need to do. So we went for quite dramatic words, buzzwords, things that would sort of, we felt that this group was actually, it's quite simple triggers because they know a lot of the data already, they're engaged with the issues already, so it's just actually the things that lead them into that. Our title we felt was the collapse in pollinator population, so something that was quite dramatic. And what we wanted to do was have like a video that would go out on social media, talking through where we're headed with the decline, so quite sort of apocalyptic, if you like. What the issues are, why it's happening, you know, what the things are that are causing pollinator decline and wildlife decline more generally. Looking at the way that we'd responded in the pandemic with the panic buying in supermarkets and the empty shelves, and echoing that to, you know, that sense of, I don't know, sort of anxiety that people felt that there not being enough, and the lack of abundance there, and sort of echoing that that's going to be continued only worse if we don't do something about it. And then at the end of the video, we would have links to background information. We would have quite an extensive petition page with a lot of the background data on there. We might think about having additional blog posts and things that people could go to. And one of the other things that that we felt was that kind of having a QR code which was stuck on lampposts so that people could when they were walking around, this is from what Isabel was suggesting to us, you know, when she was involved in the group, so that people can respond immediately to it, and it takes them to an information page and that link to the petition to get them to sign up as well. So that was quite a quick run through. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Thanks. There was a lot of visual elements in your story there, the posters and the QR codes and things, which I really liked. Isabel, did you want to make any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think it's like very, very thorough, which is great. I think with progressive activists, because like as you said, they're already quite engaged with this sort of topic. I think it's almost about, yes, you want them to sign the petition, but actually they probably are the group that are going to want to do more than that, and you kind of want to give them opportunities to do things beyond just sign the petition. So I like the fact that you've got like a blog page and you've got extra information available to them, and so in some ways you kind of want the campaign to be a bit bigger than just getting them to sign the petition, and almost want them to become advocates and sort of help other people become engaged with this campaign as well. So you sort of almost want there to be like next steps for those people so they can become the voice of the campaign a little bit. And just with the QR codes, I think I said lamppost just because I've seen QR codes on lampposts. I think you could be quite strategic with where you put QR codes and sort of think about where those people spend their time and where they're most likely to come across a QR code. So maybe it's lampposts, or maybe it's somewhere else, like maybe there's a particular kind of building or particular sort of place where they spend lots of time, obviously outside of COVID times, because at the moment no one's spending time anywhere. But yeah, in general, you know, if there's a particular sort of place that they go and QR codes, think about where to put the QR codes that's going to be relevant to them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Isabel. That's been fantastic. It's been lovely to hear from all the groups. So thanks so much for your feedback. I'm going to hand over to Sophie now, who is going to close us out.
Okay, thanks very much again, Isabel, and thank you, Alex, and thanks as well, of course, to Emma, Natalie, and everyone in the groups for your really great discussion and feedback. I think judging by the conversations we've been hearing, it sounds like everyone's been really thinking about how to appeal to different people, different emotions, different ways of thinking, maybe thinking about beer and cider a little bit as well. I think we're all missing the pub a bit, as well as you say, Isabel, how to turn communication into conversation, and from that conversation into action. So today we've heard from two excellent speakers about how small ideas can evolve to create substantial change within our community and our communities further afield, and how through the art of storytelling we can share these actions with a wider audience. Through Earth in Common, we heard how a community project in Leith has grown from crops in pots and giving Leithers a voice on their food to expanding to include restorative climate justice and supporting communities in Malawi. Our workshop with Carbon Copy taught us the importance of including empathy and emotion while engaging with others, and how to develop storytelling approaches for different audiences. Now, having taken part in this event, we would like to invite you all to tell us about a climate-related action that you can take in your local community to create positive change or to tell your story. Our Mentimeter poll in the chat allows you to submit these anonymously, so please visit www.menti.com, also linked down below, or enter the code 21673473, also in the chat, to share these with us. And while you're there, we also ask if you could provide feedback for today's event, answer the questions, what went well, and even better if. This allows us to continue to develop our online events for the future. As always, we'd be delighted to hear about any climate actions that you've taken or are taking. And we recently launched our Your 2050 Story initiative, for which another link will be found in the What's Next section of your programme, as well as a guest blog on our website. So please do share whatever you get up to with us. There will be additional resources and reading included also in the programme on all the topics that we've covered today, some of which have been provided by our speakers, so do look those up as well. And lastly, we'd like to remind you to connect with each other after the event via our social media pages, and also look out for our next event coming up on Saturday, the 17th of April, Zoom Out. Once again, big